Hey folks, this is Kalani. With the Shadowlands expansion rapidly approaching, you may be feeling like you're running out of time to lock in your main character to play as we head into a new adventure. It's a major conundrum for sure. Should you play the trusty DPS who surely never fails, or do you pick up tanking this time around to skip all of those pesky queues? We've got a handful of tips for you that might make your decision a little bit easier, or at least a bit more straightforward. So here we go. How do you pick a main character for a new expansion? First things first, role. This is the most important question you have to answer for yourself before you even think about getting into which class does what well and why. Do you want to tank? Do you want to heal? Do you want to DPS? Or do you want some options? Because if you want to tank, a priest probably wouldn't be the best pick. If you want to heal, rolling a warrior doesn't make much sense either. But if you want the option of all three roles in the same class, so you don't have to rely on playing ults, then your options will get narrower still. My first big tip here would be to consider ults a bit more. Battle for Azeroth was notoriously bad for ults for more or less the entire expansion. Every system that was introduced made it harder to play multiple characters, but Shadowlands will be different. I'm planning on keeping a few characters up to date this time around, which means I'm not as restricted on the whole options thing. Because I'm going to have a tank ult for sure, I'm actually happy playing a main that can't tank. I wouldn't have considered that in BFA because it was a nightmare, but as I said, Shadowlands is different. So have a think about what role you want to fill and whether you absolutely need all of those options on your main character. Because if you don't have to tank and heal and DPS on the same tune, you can shift some of that weight off onto an ult that you can play some of the time, and you're much more free to play what you actually want rather than what gives you the most options. But what if you don't know what role you're interested in or want to play? Alright, let's take a step back and let's have a chat about what each role in World of Warcraft does and why you might want to, or not want to, play them. The backbone of any successful group are the tanks. Your job is to make sure the squishy folks in the back don't die, you take the brunt of the damage, and you keep any enemies focused on you. You're also going to be the one setting the pace for many types of content, especially dungeons. A DPS can't really throw themselves into the thick of things and expect to stay alive very long. There's a reason we have tanks after all. So the tank goes in first, pulls everything together, holds the aggro, and makes it easy for the DPS to do their job. A good tank makes sure whatever they're doing is done smoothly and efficiently. Pulling enough to progress at a decent pace is something of an art. If you pull too slowly, then the DPS will likely get impatient and start complaining, or just start pulling for you, which can be a whole mess. If you pull too much, you'll stress out the healer and you may end up wiping, causing the run to take even longer. Therein lies one of the problems many players have with tanking. The focus is quite literally on you. You set the pace, you take the lead, and usually everyone will follow. But if you don't like to lead, or if you're just not confident in tanking, that can have a negative effect on your playtime, which none of us want. Tanking also tends to be a bit of a thankless job, when it's arguably one of the harder roles to fill. The good news though is that playing a tank well can be incredibly satisfying. None of your group died, you didn't lose aggro, you managed your health and cooldowns well, and the content was cleared in record time. That's a great feeling. The other, more difficult role to fill, and the one which is right up there as a key player in every group of every type of content, are the healers. I would say healing is the hardest role to fill for me personally, and it's also the most stressful. The entire group is relying on you doing your job, otherwise they die. That's the bottom line of healing. You're the main thing that stands between your group's victory and defeat. You can have the best tank in the world, but if they aren't getting any heals and they don't completely overgear the content, they're going to die. You could have the best DPS in the world, passing in the top 1% of every pull of every boss. But a dead DPS does no DPS. I think good healers are really what carry content, because when something starts to go wrong, it's typically the healers that have to make some amazing plays to bring the group back from those mistakes. Good healers really can carry a raid. If the healers don't do their job, basically no one else can do their jobs because they'll be dead. So be sure to keep everyone topped off and everyone will stay happy, which again is kind of the problem with healers as well. People tend to get a bit annoyed if they die, even if it's their fault, right? So expect to share a good chunk of the blame if anything goes wrong. Thankfully, healing can also feel very rewarding because it's very clear when you make a large difference in a group as a healer. Did you just save the tank's life with a quick cooldown and a huge burst heal? They probably noticed. Did the raid just almost entirely die, but your quick raid cooldown and reactions brought everyone back up to manageable levels? Well, at least you probably noticed. You can save the day as a healer, and it feels incredible when you do. The tanks and healers are definitely the key for successful groups in raids, dungeons, and sometimes even PvP, but they're also more difficult to play, there's a lot more responsibility, and you don't get to show off your logs quite as much. Here enters the DPS, where being on top of those pesky meters seems to be the only thing 90% of the DPS seem to care about, but it's understandable. That's their job. As a DPS, you have one job. Okay, well, two jobs really. The first is to deal damage. That's why you're called a damage per second class. The second job is to not make the tanks or healers' job harder. For example, standing in fire to deal some extra damage is what a bad DPS would do. Step out of the fire, make sure your healers don't hate you, and then go back to dealing some DPS. Because remember, a dead DPS does no DPS. So really your second job is to stay alive, but making your tanks and healers happy at the same time is definitely worth it. Trust me. DPS can be split into two groups, melee DPS and range DPS. Melee DPS will be right on top of whatever they're attacking, which means you're staring at the boss's butt most of the time. The trade-off for the lackluster scenery is your mobility. Melee DPS typically have no movement restrictions for their abilities. As long as they're in melee range, they can go to town. They can jump, strafe, run around in circles, whatever they want, as long as they stay in range. This means a melee can react much easier to any mechanics that they need to dodge, while maintaining their DPS the entire time. That's the key. They do typically need to pay more attention to ground effects though. Again, just standing in the fire to make sure you can reach the boss doesn't always work out too well. Melee DPS also tend to have rather quick rotations where you'll be pushing buttons as fast as you can or as soon as they are available. I guess you would call their rotations spammy, so if you don't want to be mashing your keyboard as quickly as you can, melee might not be for you. Range DPS are more or less the opposite. They get to look at much more than just the boss's butt, so they have a better lay of the land usually. This means that they might be able to see mechanics happen before they have to move, which helps out with this next part. Almost every range DPS needs to stand still to deal damage. Anyone with casted abilities, which is every ranged class except one, cannot move and deal their maximum DPS. That's their main restriction. You have to plant and cast. This can make it annoying or frustrating when it comes to dodging mechanics, because if you're moving constantly, you're not dealing any damage, and that just doesn't feel fun for some players. The trick is learning how to stutter step your casts to maximize damage while moving for mechanics, and knowing which parts of your rotation allow for additional movement. Learning and understanding a fight and its mechanics is also very important, so you can be proactive instead of reactive, which will increase your potential DPS drastically. There is one range DPS that kind of falls outside of these rules. The Hunters. If you want the mobility of a melee class with the advantage of DPS from ranged, pick a Hunter. You almost can't go wrong with Hunter, honestly, and I still maintain it's one of the best classes for beginners to pick up. Ranged in general tend to have slower rotations because a lot of the time you're going to be casting. Any casting time is time spent not hitting your keys, so it's significantly slower when compared to melee. Some ranged DPS do get a bit spammy sometimes, but for the most part it's still slower than a melee. If you want a more relaxed rotation when it comes to hitting keys, ranged could be great for you, but if you actually like the fast-paced feel of a melee, a ranged DPS might feel too slow. Hopefully that helps you narrow down the role choice, but there are so many tanks, so many healers, and even more DPS. Even if you have a role picked out, how do you go from here? The first thing I would consider is theme. Maybe you want to tank. So here's a question for you. How do you feel about shields? Are shields a crucial part of playing a tank in your mind? Does a tank without a shield just seem too weird? Because demon hunters, monks, and death knights don't use shields as part of their equipment, but the demon hunters harden their skin with bone spikes. They use fell magic to protect themselves and deal damage to their enemies. Monks rely on dodging, bobbing and weaving, and staggering damage, so they never take the full force of any hit, but they do take constant damage over time. And Death Knights are all about personal sustain and death magic. If any of these themes really speaks out to you, take the class for a spin and see how it goes. If you, like me, love the idea of shield tanks, Paladins wield Holy Light to protect themselves and others, and they toss their shield out in Captain America style to hit a bunch of enemies. Very satisfying. And then warriors rely on their beefiness to withstand massive hits. If you don't like the theme of a character, you might have a hard time sticking to it, and you're just going to be constantly re-rolling and never settling. The same goes for healers. You can heal using Holy Light, you can heal by calling upon the powers of the elements, you can heal with the raw power of nature, or you can dance around with amazing green swirls of mist. Every class looks different. If you've always wanted to harness the elements, try out a Shaman. If you love how priests look with their spell animations, go for that. You should also pay attention to how the classes actually play. Druids rely almost entirely on heal over time spells, so if you want to be a single target super focused tank healer, that's probably not the best pick. Holy Paladins, on the other hand, specialize in strong single target heals which they can duplicate with their beacons of light. It's amazing how much healing a Paladin can kick out on a single target. The Shamans are incredibly strong when the group is stacked together thanks to their healing rain and chain heal, so for content where you can all huddle together, Shamans will really shine. Priests are a very interesting healer because they're the only class with two different, distinct healing styles. Discipline relies on dealing damage to heal, and it can be so much fun when you get into the swing of it. You can bubble people, prevent damage, and play kind of a hybrid DPS healer. Holy, on the other hand, is straight, raw, throughput heals. You have strong single target heals, absolutely amazing AoE heals, and you can pump out so much healing, it's astounding sometimes. And then monks have some interesting quirks as well. They have a good mix of heal over time and direct heals, they can cast heals while channeling other heals, and they can even hop into melee to do some of those crazy monk kicks at the same time. This becomes even more important when you look at DPS though. So many DPS classes overlap in one way or another these days, so their theme is really what sets them apart. Do you want to be throwing fell fire magic at your enemies, or would you rather use real fire with an option of frost or arcane? Warlocks and Mages play similarly for the most part, stand at ranged, cast a bunch of spells, but they look and feel very different. Rogues and Warriors are in a bit of the same boat. They both stand in melee, they attack as quickly as their resource allows them to, and they both stand in fire. Okay, maybe not that last part, but rogues are light armor wearing, stealthy, sneak around and stab you in the butt characters, whereas warriors are heavily armored, smash everything around them, and show off their weapon collection characters. There's a big difference in how they look and feel to play, even if they serve in the same role. That's assuming you actually care about your theme and class fantasy. If all you want to know is, how can I be on top of the DPS meters? Well, that's a very different question right there, but one that's arguably much easier to answer. With everything taken into consideration, if you just want to play a melee DPS and you're not bothered about other options, I would recommend the Rogues. You have 3 specs to play, and usually one of them is very competitive, and I know Rogues are looking good from what we've seen so far on the beta. They also have an answer to almost every situation between Vanish, Cloak, Evasion. It's actually kind of crazy how many defensives they have, and they're incredibly popular for Mythic Plus dungeons. So you have that going for you as well. If you want to play a ranged DPS, I would go with Warlocks or Hunters. Hunters haven't seen too many changes going into Shadowlands, but they are an incredibly reliable class. And you have the mobility of a melee, if you're playing Beast Mastery anyway, which can be invaluable in many situations. Warlocks are looking to dominate the DPS meters again, if nothing changes anyway, and they also have 3 ranged DPS specs, so one of them is usually in the top 5 of DPS. I actually don't think Warlocks have been bad in a very, very long time, so it's a pretty safe pick as well. Now, if you're not too bothered about theme, and you're not super bothered about performance, maybe you just want the easiest class to play in every role. That's a relatively quick list as well. I would say prop paladins for tanks. They're easy, they're looking to be incredibly powerful, and they're very satisfying to play. For the healers, holy priests have an answer for almost every situation. It's incredibly simple to get into it, they're a great healer in general, and if you do want a more complicated playstyle later on, you can move into discipline without having to re-roll. That's pretty valuable. And for the DPS, it would have to be the hunter. Having the mobility of a melee with every other advantage of a ranged DPS is just too good to pass up. They might not be the easiest class to play in every sense of the word, but I think they're the best class to pick up if you're new to the game. So just a couple notes to finish this off. I think you're always best picking a class that resonates with you on at least some level. If you hate the idea of Holy Light, I don't think you're going to stick with a Paladin for too long. If you really don't like demons or fel magic or the bad guys, Warlocks probably don't fit too well either. Playing something that you can gel with thematically gives you the best chance of longevity, in my opinion. If you want to chase the flavor of the month, whatever is top DPS for any given raid tier, you can do that, just keep in mind that you will be likely leveling and catching up again with every patch that comes through, and the best DPS at the start of a raid tier could be very different when compared to the best DPS at the end of a raid tier, so you might even be re-rolling in between patches. If you think that's worth it, go for it. You do you. Wait for all of the logs to come out and who's on top. Roll it, catch up, have fun. Personally, I'll be sticking with something a bit more stable. And then the last point here, all of the class changes are currently available on the PTR, which is available for everybody to get on, so you can hop across there, copy a character, and see what's changing. That's the best way to test any characters, in my opinion, because quite a few classes do have a lot of changes coming with the pre-patch. So what about me? What am I going to main this time around? Well, I'm going to go back to ranged DPS. It's what I prefer, and honestly, it's what I'm best at. When it comes to DPS, I love having the potential to be on top, so I'm going to focus on what I think is strong and fun at the same time. I can't play something that I don't think is fun, but I do want to play a good DPS. So this time around, my main character will be a Warlock. At least that's what I'm thinking. The cool thing about Shadowlands is that I feel pretty safe saying that I'll be leveling and playing quite a few alts. The alts that I have lined up are Prop Paladin, Hunter, and my Demon Hunter, so those will get carried forward with me into Shadowlands, but honestly I'll probably play a lot more than that. I am very excited for this expansion and a return to some normal progression paths. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking right now. As many of you who have popped by the stream probably know by now, but what about you wonderful folks? Do you have any idea what your main character will be going to the next expansion, or are you still on the fence about it? Do you think you'll play more alts in Shadowlands with how everything is looking so far? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. If you want to explore what's left of the beta, pop by just to say hi, or maybe even help us get ready for Shadowlands. You can find us over at twitch.tv/KalaniTV. We stream every Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday at 12 PM PST, and watching the stream and coming to say hi is one of the best ways you can support the channel right now, and if you ever wanted to be included in the long list of names at the end of every video, a subscription on Twitch is the easiest way to make that happen. You get a free sub to any Twitch channel if you have Amazon Prime too, so be sure to take advantage of that. A big thank you to everyone who's subscribed on Twitch already, and to our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, well, now you know how. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.